In the beginning was matter, and matter begot the amoeba begot the worm begot the fish begot the amphibian begot the reptile begot the lower mammal begot the lemur begot the monkey begot the man who imagined God. This is the genealogy of man. That is almost a verbatim quote from an atheist by the name of Charles Smith. Charles Smith has put for us in a nutshell the idea of godlessness. That's what the word atheist means. A meaning no, theist meaning God. Atheist means a person who says there is no God. According to this idea, some 13.82 billion years ago, there was a massive explosion called the Big Bang. That explosion brought the universe into existence, and subsequently from that explosion, stars coalesced out of the original material, and they exploded and brought all the elements into existence. Suppose about 5 billion years ago, the sun coalesced out of space dust, etc. The magnetic gravitational pull of the sun caused planets to start to form around the sun. Our planet Earth accidentally, from mindless, chance, random processes, formed supposedly, according to this atheistic idea, some 5 billion years ago, and we are here through no purpose, no mind, no directing agent whatsoever, purely accidentally. The idea of atheism. Right now in the United States of America, there are about 22 million people who would call themselves either atheist or agnostic. The word agnostic just means no knowledge. They are people who say, I don't think there's a God. I can't prove 100% that there's not, but I'm really pretty sure there's not, and so I'm just going to act like there isn't. That's the highest number of unbelievers that our nation has ever had in its history. 22 million people. To put that into a little perspective, I was living there in North Alabama for quite some time. When you drive through Birmingham, they need to drive at 5:30 on Friday, and somehow each one of them owns 2 vehicles, and they're driving both of them at the same time. You don't know how that happens, but that's what the streets feel like, as crowded as they are. Now you take Birmingham, Alabama, it's got 1 million people in all of its suburbs, etc. That's counting every person from age 1 day old all the way up. And you replace that 1 million people with people who say there's no God, and then not only do you have one city full of 1 million that say there's no God, or 2 cities, or 3 cities, or 4 cities, multiply it by 22 million. And that's the number of people in the United States of America today who adhere to atheism. Now, there's another idea. I dare say, you being in the audience, at least many of you have heard of this particular idea. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth was without form and void, and darkness was over the face of the deep, and the Spirit of God hovered over the face of the waters. And God said, let there be light, and there was light. And God divided the light from the darkness, and the light He called day, the darkness He called night, and evening and a morning, day 1. And then subsequently, day 2, He created the sky, or the expanse, or what is called the firmament, day 3. The flowers, grass, and trees, day 4, sun, moon, and stars, day 5, birds and fish, day 6, animals and humans, and on the 7th day ceased His creative activity. I would suggest many of you would be familiar with that idea. And so we have these 2 ideas. The idea that there is an all-powerful, all-knowing personality behind the construction of our universe, or the idea that there's nothing. That there's no being, there's no mind, there's no purpose behind it. It's just all really a big cosmic accident. And so we're here tonight to investigate this situation. Which of these is the correct idea? They can't both be right. They're mutually exclusive. They're diametrically opposed. You can't have one form of one and another form of the other and mix them together at all. Either there's a God or there's not. And I believe that you and I both would agree that it's the most important question that any human being could ask. Because if there is a God, someone who created us, then that's going to have some serious consequences for how we live, as opposed to if we're here by blind, random chance processes over multiplied millions of years. Now, what I'd like to suggest is we can come to a correct answer on this using our minds to assess evidence and to arrive at therefore and a conclusion. And so what we're going to try to do tonight, I know you've probably come in here with a preset idea. Some of you have come in here thinking, I know for a fact there's a God. Some of you might have come in here thinking, I know there's not a God. But what I'd like for us to do this evening is look at the evidence and come to a conclusion based on that evidence. And so I'm going to present evidence that I think, for the most part, everybody in the discussion accepts. But then we're going to take that evidence and we're going to look at where that evidence leads. And I think at the end of this presentation, you will have a very clear understanding that it leads to one of these two conclusions: there's a God or there's not a God. Now here's what we're going to do. We're going to start with some scientific evidence. And what I mean by that is there are some laws in science that every one of us understands. We use them every single day. We use them multiple times a day. Lots of times we don't really even know that we're using them, but we do. The most fundamental scientific law in the world, we use it all the time. In fact, you use it every time you get up, every time you move your hands, every time you do anything. It's the law of cause and effect. It's very simple. A law in science is one that there's never been a single exception that anybody's ever seen to it. That's why it's a law. If there ever were an exception, it would no longer be a law. Now, the law of cause and effect simply says this: for every material effect you see, there is a cause that came before it and is greater than it. For every material effect you see, there's a cause that came before it or simultaneous to it and is greater than it. Now, like I said, law is something that in science you don't ever find an exception to. Now, let me tell you what I mean by that. Law of gravity. Law of gravity says things fall toward the center of the earth at 9.8 meters per second squared. If I were to drop this pencil, which way is it going to fall? It's going to fall down every time. What if you don't like the way it falls? What if you wish that when you let go of this pencil, it just hovered in midair? Wouldn't that be neat? Well, the problem with that is there's a law of gravity that says when you drop the pencil, it falls at 9.8 meters per second squared toward the center of the earth, whether you like it or not. What if there were a bunch of people who didn't like it? What if everybody in this room didn't like it, and another million people didn't like it, and another billion people didn't like it, and you all got together and you said, guys, you know what, I'm tired of that law of gravity. You know, when I get out of bed in the morning, my foot goes down toward the floor. And I just don't like that. I'd like to, when I get out of bed in the morning, just push myself off the bed and float over to my drawer and be able to pull out my drawer and not ever have to step on the floor, especially in the winter when the floor is cold. Wouldn't it be neat if you just floated around? So, all right, guys, we've got a billion people who all are kind of upset with the law of gravity, and we want to change it. We're going to have a big vote. We're going to vote. 1 billion people are going to vote on the law of gravity. All those in favor of changing the law of gravity say, we've got a billion people that vote on changing the law of gravity. Now, we've changed it. I just need a volunteer to step off a 20-story building to prove that we've changed the law of gravity because a billion people just voted on it. Wouldn't do it, would it? 2 billion? 3? Okay, let's say we somehow, in a feat of human logistics that is unsurpassed, got 7.82 billion people all connected to vote on the law of gravity, and they all voted it down. You still got a law of gravity? Why? Because there's no exceptions. You don't vote on it. You don't change it. It doesn't matter if you like it. It's just what it is. Now, the law of cause and effect is just exactly that. For every material effect you see in the universe, there's a cause that came before it and was greater than it. Now, you understand this just exactly like you understand you're sitting there. Work with me. You see how this works. You use it all the time. Suppose, now this is a hypothetical, but suppose you are in your seat. You are listening to what I say and are so in rapt attention that you're not thinking about what you're going to eat after this. You're not thinking about the chores that you've got tomorrow. You are just concentrating on what I'm saying. Now, like I said, it's hypothetical. That doesn't happen. But let's suppose that that really was going on and you were really paying that close attention, and all of a sudden, this songbook launched across this room going 95 miles an hour. Slams into that audio visual glass in the back, shatters the glass, busts the camera off of the tripod there. And your eyes get as big as saucers, and you turn to me and you say, Kyle, what caused that? And I say to you, nothing. Sometimes songbooks just shoot themselves across rooms going 95 miles an hour, and there's no cause for those kinds of things. Would you ever accept an answer like that? You know better than that. Why? Because you understand the law of cause and effect. Law of cause and effect says for every material effect that you see, there's a cause that came before it, and that is greater than it. If I were to stand here and try to convince you that a songbook shooting across a room going 95 miles an hour does not have a cause, then you would think I was one brick shy of a load, a little bit off my rocker. Something didn't go all the way up. The elevator doesn't quite hit the top floor. You would think something's messed up there. You don't have physical effects without legitimate causes. Now, here's the problem. If you are going to suggest that this universe popped into existence from nothing, the first question is this universe physical? Yes. So the law of cause and effect applies to it. Does the universe have a cause? You see, that is the question that an atheistic philosophy would have a terrible problem with, because the universe is a physical entity, but in order for atheism to be true, the universe has to not have a cause at all. And so when you start looking at that Big Bang, you just ask the question, what caused the Big Bang? And they're going to explain to you, if you were to read the literature, a singularity that they say is 10 to the negative 26 centimeters across, smaller than you can even see with the unaided eye. It's a tiny, tiny little ball of something. And so the next question would be, is it physical? Well, yes, it's physical. Where did it come from? And you see the problem. The problem is, if you don't have a supernatural, non-physical entity, then you can't have a physical universe. And so when you look at that singularity that supposedly exploded into this Big Bang and ask the question, where did it come from? Do you want to know the answer that you get from the atheistic philosophy as to where that singularity that supposedly exploded into the universe came from? I'll give it to you. You may recognize the name of Stephen Hawking. Stephen Hawking had Lou Gehrig's disease. You've probably seen him on the History Channel. He did a Curiosity show and several other things. He would travel around and have packed houses of people who would come and listen to him. He talked through a modulated voice, almost like a robotic voice that had a computer system set up on his chair there. If I understand it right, there was about 1 inch of his face that he used to control his whole chair. He was, during the time that he was living, recognized as the world's leading theoretical physicist. And he was an atheist. And he was trying to put forth a scientific idea as to how the universe could get here without a God. And here's what he said. He said, if you were to look at stars, well, they have to have a cause. If you were to look at a black hole, it would have to have a cause. He said, but entire universes like ours just pop into existence from nothing. Now, that's the world's leading theoretical physicist at the time that he was alive, suggesting to us what's supposed to be a scientific answer, and he said the only way that you can say there's no God is if you say an entire universe pops into existence from nothing. Now, not to insult your intelligence, but if there ever was a time when there was nothing, what would you have now? Nothing. Nothing comes from nothing. Nothing, to borrow a Sound of Music lyric, nothing comes from nothing, nothing ever could. If there ever were a time when there was nothing, that's exactly what you would have right now. And so the atheistic idea presents to you an impossible non-scientific suggestion that you've got a whole physical universe that defies the fundamental scientific law of the universe, and that is the law of cause and effect. Now, when the atheistic proposition is challenged with this, they say, okay, well, fine. But you're suggesting that there's a God. Where did God come from? Great question. They say, why doesn't the law of cause and effect apply to God too? Let's replay the law of cause and effect. For every material effect you see, there is a cause that came before it and that was greater than it. For every what kind of effect that you see? Material effect that you see. See, here's the thing. We can understand and do research and do experiments on physical stuff. We know how it behaves. Everything physical has a cause that came before it and that was greater than it. But who has ever said that God is physical? You see, that's the thing. What the atheistic proposition wants to say is, hey, we've got this universe, and somewhere at the beginning of the universe, it popped into existence from nothing. Well, would that violate a scientific law? Yeah, so at the beginning, it wasn't really matter. It was something more than matter. It was super matter. It didn't really act like matter. You see, the problem is it is matter. It's physical. And so what you've got to have is something that doesn't act like matter. It doesn't act physical. What do you need? Something that is super physical, supernatural. Something that the law of cause and effect does not apply to, and we know it applies to everything physical. And see, if you're suggesting the atheistic proposition, then all you have to deal with is physical stuff. And so what you have to say is, well, we got this physical thing that doesn't act physical. Well, no, you can't do that because we know how matter acts. So if you've got to have something that doesn't act like matter, what do you need? God is a spirit. And that's what you have to have. You know, the old joke of the scientist going to God and saying, God, I just don't think you've done a good job creating your world. I think I could do it better. I think I could engineer stuff a little bit better than you. I'm looking around and I see some what I would consider poor engineering. I think that if you and I were in a contest and you allowed me to make a universe and you make a universe, I feel like I could do better. And God said, okay, well, let's see what happens here. You start making your universe, I'll start making mine, and we'll see what happens. And the scientist bends down and he picks up some dirt and he starts, and God says, hold on just a second. You have to get your own dirt. You see, the atheistic proposition says that you have to somehow get something from nothing. And the world's leading theoretical physicist presents to us the best scientific answer that he's got, and that is a universe that pops into existence from nothing. Now, honestly, if I were to stand up here and say, hey, you know what, songbooks just sometimes spontaneously shoot across rooms going 95 miles an hour. They don't have a cause for that. It just happens. You wouldn't entertain that idea for half a second. And yet, the atheistic scientific world wants us to entertain the idea that somehow a universe pops into existence from nothing. No, it just doesn't make any sense. And that's why in Genesis chapter 1 it says, in the beginning, God. You've got to have a starting place, and the universe can't be it. Now, here's the second problem with the atheistic proposition. The law of cause and effect says that for every material effect, you have to have a cause that came before it or simultaneous to it and was greater than it. Now, let's go back to our illustration. We've got the songbook. You're listening in rapt attention. The songbook shoots across the room going 95 miles an hour. You turn and look at me and you say, Kyle, what caused that? This time I don't give you the absurd idea that nothing caused it. I say, oh yeah, it's got a cause. Every material effect has got a cause. Here's what caused it this time. If you were watching closely, you would have seen a tiny speck of dust that landed on the edge of this songbook and catapulted it going 95 miles an hour across the back to the back wall. A tiny speck of dust. Well, now what's the problem? The effect is not big enough. Now I'm presenting to you an effect. I mean a cause, the cause is not big enough to produce the effect. You see, if you're going to get a songbook shooting across a room at 95 miles an hour, you've got to have something bigger than a tiny speck of dust. You're going to have some type of propulsion mechanism like some gunpowder or some type of really big spring or some type of air. A little speck of dust is not going to do it. Now, when you go to the atheistic proposition, number one, they can't get that original tiny ball of matter. But number two, it's supposed to be smaller than a period at the end of a sentence, and it explodes into our universe. Now, how big is the universe? Because you see, whatever brought this universe into existence, according to the law of cause and effect, has to be bigger than the universe. Now, let's look at how big our universe is. We live in the Milky Way galaxy. I like living in the Milky Way galaxy, really. There's a lot of reasons I like living in the Milky Way galaxy. Number one reason that I like living in the Milky Way galaxy is that it's got a candy bar name for a name. I mean, do you know any other galaxies that have a candy bar name for a name? No, you don't, because the rest of them have stuff like Andromeda Galaxy, Galaxy GX302, stuff like that. Oh no. We live in the Milky Way galaxy. If you look up on a very clear night, if you're not close to a city and you look out into that night sky, it's so full of stars, it's almost got a little milky look to it, almost a little cloudy look to it. That's why it's called the Milky Way galaxy. Now, in our Milky Way galaxy, there are any number of stars. The star that's closest to us is the sun. It's a middle-sized star. It's about 93 million miles from us. It's called one solar unit from us to the sun. The sun is pretty big. In fact, when I say pretty big, it's a middle-sized star, but 1 million Earths can fit in the sun. And so if you were close to the sun, Earth, you had 1 million of them, you could fit 1 million Earths inside the sun. And that'd be one star. So it's 1 million times bigger than the Earth. Now, there are some stars that are about 1,400 times bigger than the sun. And so you could fit 1,400 million Earths into those stars. Yeah, pretty big stuff. We're talking about some big numbers. I don't expect you to be able to regurgitate this for a test at the end of this, but here's the point. It's pretty big stuff. Now, when you start asking yourself, okay, the sun, it's the closest star to us. It could fit 1 million Earths inside of it. How many stars are there out there in our Milky Way galaxy? Yeah, that's a really good question. Really good question. If you wanted to count the stars in our Milky Way galaxy, and you got up every day and counted to 10,000 every morning, let's say you did that before breakfast. You just thought you'd get up and count to 10. I don't know who does that. When my oldest son was about, I think he was about 6, he used to get up on Saturday mornings earlier than we did. And he would do stuff like watch cartoons or whatever it was. One morning I got up and Drew had been up for a while. And I said, Drew, what'd you do this morning? He said, I counted. I said, really, what'd you count? He said, nothing. Just laid in bed and counted. I said, what'd you count to? He said, 3,000. You ever got up on a Saturday morning, sun streaming through your blinds, you thought this would be a great day to count? I think I'm just going to count to 3,000 today. Well, I have had some other little kids come up to me afterward and said, hey, I do that too. I counted like 4,227 one time. Oh, I don't count in the mornings. I don't. Some of you might. I don't. I'm not a big morning counter. Some of you might. But if you wanted to, you get up and count every single morning to 10,000. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 9, 10, 11, 12. Every one of those numbers represents a star. Some of them a million times the size of the earth, some of them smaller, some of them bigger. Every number, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, represents a star. You count 10,000 today, you count 10,000 tomorrow, you count 10,000 the next day, every day. Do you know how long it's going to take you to count the number of stars in the Milky Way galaxy? Well, depends on when you ask that question, because if you had asked that question 5 years ago or so, here's what they would have told you. It will take you 27,000 years, counting 10,000 every single day, to count to the number 100 billion. 100 billion was the number that they said 5 years ago or so, that was the number of stars in the Milky Way galaxy. Like I said, this 5 years ago. About 5 years ago, they said, you know what? We were off by a little. We thought it would be 100 billion stars in the Milky Way galaxy. But really what we have found out is there's a bunch of space dust out there that gets in the way of our lenses. And there's not 100 billion stars. There are 300 to 400 billion stars in the Milky Way galaxy. Now, let's ask the simple question. You've got 300 billion stars. Some of them are 1,400 times the size of the sun. What could cause a galaxy that big? Oh, well, hold on just a second. We need to take a step back and ask ourselves, how many galaxies are there? Because that's just the Milky Way galaxy. That's just one galaxy. Out of how many, what we got, 10 galaxies out there, 20 galaxies, 30? Oh, no. You don't have 10 or 20 or 30 or 30,000 or 50,000 or 30 million or 50 million. Look, we're in the Milky Way galaxy, and it's not even a big galaxy. It's really just pretty average. And it's got 300 billion stars in it, and guess how many galaxies they tell us are out there at the present? Oh, they tell us we got about 100 billion galaxies. So now get up every single day and count to 10,000, and every one of those represents an entire galaxy. The size or bigger of our Milky Way galaxy, and when you start 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, you're talking about a galaxy. You count to 10,000, it takes you 27,000 years just to count to the number of galaxies. Now, thank you, Kyle, for boring us to death. We appreciate all these big numbers, but we don't care. I understand. Here's the point. Where do you get something big enough to bring into existence a universe that is 100 billion galaxies big? I'll give you one more big number and we'll be done with this and we'll move on. Suppose that you were on this side of the universe, and that wall is the end of the universe. So let's say we're on each end of the universe, and let's work it a little bit more here. This is this side of the universe, that's that side. From here to there is the entire universe, right? Let's say you could travel the speed of light. Speed of light is 186,302 miles per second. It's 7 times around the equator of the earth in 1 second. 1 Mississippi. Light just went around the equator of the earth 7 times as fast as you could say 1 Mississippi. Now, a light year is how many miles light travels in a single year. It's something like 586 quadrillion or trillion, something like that. So every single year, you're traveling that many miles. Do you know how many years it would take you to get across the entire universe? Well, when I first started doing these kinds of seminars and studying this kind of stuff, it would have taken us 20 billion years traveling the speed of light to get across the universe. But hold on just a second. I say when I first started, oh, guess what? They've come out with some new measurements, and they said, we were off on that a little bit. Not long ago, they wrote that we missed the size of the universe by a tad. We think it's at least twice as big. Could take you 46 billion years to travel the speed of light and get across. Oh, and I thought it was very interesting. At the end of this article, they said, and some researchers from Oxford say it could be 250 times that. Could be 250 times 46 billion. Now, it's pretty big, isn't it? Where do you get something like that? Tiny singularity that's smaller than a period at the end of a sentence that popped into existence from nothing? See the problem here. Number one, it violates the first aspect of the law of cause and effect. You don't get stuff to pop into existence out of nothing. Number two, it's not big enough. Now there's a point I'm driving at here. And you'll find it in Romans chapter 1 if you wanted to look for a Bible verse for it, but the concept is one that you can understand without even quoting a Bible verse. For since the beginning of creation, His invisible attributes are clearly seen, being understood, even from the things which are made, even, now listen to the things it says, are understood from the things which are made. His eternal power. Okay, what's that mean? Number one, you have to have something that's eternal. Matter can't do it. So you know there's a being that's eternal. And number two, what else do you know about this being? His power. You've got to have something a whole lot bigger than a period at the end of a sentence to get a 46 billion light year universe. And there's a reason why the psalmist said in Psalm 19, the heavens declare the glory of God, the firmament shows His handiwork, day to day utters speech, night unto night utters knowledge. There is no language, no place where their voice is not heard. You know what that means? If you live in Hawaii, guess what? You can look up at the night sky and realize there's something much bigger than you out there. If you live in Denver, Colorado, you can do the same. If you live in Belize, the same. If you live in South America, the same. If you live on the other side of the globe, the same. There's no place in this world where you cannot look up to the sky and see that there's something bigger than you. And so the idea somehow that people who believe in God, they just don't follow the evidence, that's not true at all. In fact, if you were to take what you know scientifically, the law of cause and effect, most fundamental law in the world, and you were to apply it to the atheistic idea that there is no God, that there is no eternal supernatural being, then you're in a quandary because you can't get something to pop into existence from nothing, and you can't get that something to be so tiny that it'll create for you a universe this big. And there's another aspect of the world that is impossible to account for without the idea of God. And that's this. You guys understand it very well. You see it all the time. If you see design, you know there's a designer. It's that simple, not hard to understand. William Paley had a very good, simple, naturalistic explanation for this. He said, if you walk out into the woods, you look down, you see a watch. You pick it up. It's got hands that are moving in perfectly orchestrated time. You pop the back off, you look at the back, and it's got springs, it's got cogs, it's got gears, and it works perfectly. What do you know about that watch? Some intelligent being created that watch. Now, what we're dealing with here is indirect observation. Are there some things you can know about the being who created that watch without ever seeing that being? Oh yeah, you do this kind of stuff all the time. Let's say you're on the beach. You look down on the beach and there are footprints. Those footprints are separated by about 18 inches and they go straight down the sand. They have 5 toes, a heel, an arch, a ball, and they continue to go down the beach. Now you look up, you don't see anyone on the beach. Well, guess we can't know anything about the people who made these footprints. Is that what we say? I don't see anybody and I can't touch anybody directly that made the footprints, so nobody exists who made the footprints. Would anybody reason like that? What could you know about a person who made footprints on the beach? Number one, you could look down and you could see there were 5 toes, a ball and a heel and an arch. Could you know it was a human being? Absolutely. And if you had mechanical equipment that was technical enough, and you could measure how deep those footprints were pressing in the sand, and you could measure the density of the sand, what else could you know about that person? How much they weighed? And if you could measure the length of the footprint, you could get a pretty good estimation as to how tall the person was. And if you had a measurement that you could take as to the stride and how far apart that stride was, could you say also about how tall that person was? Absolutely. So you could know the person's weight, you could know how many toes the person had, you could know that they were a person, and you could know the height of the person and never even see the person. So you could take something that you did see and reason to something that you haven't seen, but you could still know about, right? Really easy to understand. For since the beginning of creation, His invisible attributes, the stuff you can't see about God, are clearly understood, being understood by the things which are made, the things you can see. Now let's take this design idea and start looking at it. You can go from the top down, and what I mean by that is you can look at the design in the universe just on a large scale. You know what, even the people who don't believe in God, they've come up with this idea called the Goldilocks zone. And they say that planet Earth is in just this Goldilocks zone. It just looks like, we don't understand it, we don't know how it works, but it looks like the entire universe was designed for life to exist on planet Earth. Now, why do they call it the Goldilocks planet or the Goldilocks zone? Well, they call it that because planet Earth is just right. You remember Goldilocks and the three bears? She went into that cabin there in the woods, and the bears had gone for a walk because they were eating porridge that morning, and the porridge was too hot. And I have another little theory about why they left. And it wasn't because the porridge was too hot. It was because it was porridge. I mean, I don't know when the last time you ate porridge for breakfast was. I don't eat a lot of porridge, but now my mom is great at a whole lot of stuff. But when I recall, she used to fix oatmeal at our house. And now it didn't come in these little fancy packets that were single serving with the fruit and pre-sweetened. No, when she would fix oatmeal, she'd put it in this big pan, and it would come out of the pan in the shape of the pan. Like it made that suction, so, and it would just be all this big cylinder-like thing on the end of the spoon. And she smack it into a bowl. Now, what we would do is we'd take that oatmeal and we would put as much butter on it as we could possibly put on it until our mom or dad said that's enough. And then we would put as much sugar on it as we possibly could and then drown it in milk, so we could forget that it was actually oatmeal. Because listen, do you know what the ingredients to oatmeal are? Oats. That's it. And what I thought was, if I didn't eat it and we could just send it to the horse out back, something's wrong with that. Okay, porridge and oatmeal I think are pretty close. So the three bears, they're eating porridge and they realize, okay, this is close to oatmeal, we're out. And so they go for a walk. Goldilocks comes in and she sits down at that first bowl and it's too high. That second bowl, Mama Bears, is too cold. That middle bowl, that last bowl, Baby Bears. What is that bowl of porridge? If you can even say this about porridge. Just right. And then she goes in that living room. She tries the chairs. Daddy Bear's too hard. Mom Bear's too soft. She sits down in Baby Bear's chair. Just right. And then she's full and she's had a rest. She goes upstairs to those beds. Daddy Bear's bed's too hard. Mom Bear's bed's too soft. Baby Bear's bed. Just right. Supposedly, from the atheistic standpoint, this universe popped into existence from nothing, violating the first part of the law of cause and effect, and then it is massively big, violating the second part of the law of cause and effect, and then somehow it's tailor-made for humans to live on planet Earth. And when I say tailor-made, what I mean by that are all of the aspects of the various different forces, etc. They're balanced on a knife's edge. If you adjusted them to the slightest degree. There's one measurement, one measurement that if you adjusted it by 40 zeros. So 0.1 is a tenth. 0.01 is a hundredth. 0.001 is a thousandth. Now go on out to a 40 decimal place, and if you altered this measurement by 0.0040 with a 1, life as you know it could not exist. You could do it from a grand scale, and truth is, entire books have been written on that. But then you could lower it down to just pick out something in the universe that's obviously designed. Thomas B. Warren did this in 1976 with Antony Flew masterfully. I don't know if you were aware of that debate. It was monumental at the time. 5,000 people every single night in Denton, Texas came out to be a part of this debate experience. Here's why. Antony Flew at the time was the recognized leading atheistic philosopher in the entire world. I'm not talking about in the United States, I'm talking about in the entire world. He had presented a paper to the Socratic Society that C.S. Lewis was chairing in the 60s. And that paper was the #1 most widely published and written on atheistic philosophical paper in the world for the next 5 decades. Still, if I understand it to this day, still is. For 50 years, Antony Flew had the leading atheistic publication in the world. Thomas B. Warren was a Christian. He had a PhD from Vanderbilt University, and he was arguing in favor of God. And he focused on this idea of design. It's very simple. If you see something that has design in it, then you know there had to be an intelligent designer. And so Thomas B. Warren put up a picture of a prosthetic hand, an artificial limb. Back then they had little line drawings. Basically they had the overhead projectors that you had to put those little clear sheets on top of. A lot of us won't remember those, but they had those little clear sheets and he put it up and it was very, very, didn't have much detail, just basically a little pencil drawing. And he said, Dr. Flew, did this prosthetic hand, this artificial hand, have a designer? You know, that was in 76. We've come pretty far with prosthesis since then. We can make some really effective fake hands. In fact, let me tell you about one. There's one that a guy by the name of Dr. Kukin and his research team developed. It weighs 10 pounds. It's lightweight metal alloy. They connected it to the shoulder of a 26-year-old Marine. And here's what's cool about it. They took nerves from her shoulder and connected them to wires that were hooked to motors on the fingers. And so she would think about moving her pinky. Well, they miswired it, and so they tried to fix that. So then she would think about moving her pinky, and she could literally move her pinky finger with the nerves that were in her shoulder connected to the wires that were in the motors of the artificial hand. Nobody ever seen anything like it. This was several years ago now. The research team said, this is amazing. She can do stuff with her artificial hand nobody's ever been able to do. Said she can hold a jar of spaghetti with one hand and with the other hand hold a spoon, and she can scrape out the remaining spaghetti sauce. Isn't that amazing? Said she can now pick up a pair of pants and fold them without having a hard surface. Unbelievable. He said, but it's clumsy. Compared to what? Dr. Flew, did this fake hand have a designer? Yes. Dr. Flew's got to answer yes. I mean, if you say, no, that artificial hand does not have an intelligent designer, you no longer are respected in any circles. So then Dr. Warren puts up a picture of a human hand. And he said, Dr. Flew, did this hand have a designer? That human hand? Far superior to every aspect of a prosthetic limb. Such smooth movement. Oh, not only that, but it's self-repairing. If you accidentally smash the bones in your finger while you're hammering on a nail, there's an enzyme in your body that rushes immediately to those bones, starts eating the little chips of bones that don't go back into your finger. The ones that are big enough are in the right place, it leaves those alone. You ever thought about that? Your body produces an enzyme that eats bone. What if that goes haywire? Wake up one morning, your bone's gone. It's pretty well designed. It only eats the bone that it detects is not useful for your body's beneficial services. So sends that enzyme, it gets rid of those little shards of bone, but the other ones it leaves alone and they go back to where they need to go, and your bone starts regrowing, and in 6 weeks, lots of times the place where you hammered your finger, oh, it might be a little crooked. See that? Might be a little crooked. But lots of times where you broke your bone is stronger than it was before you broke it. Take a knife and you accidentally cut your arm somewhere, starts bleeding, but within seconds, there is a chemical cascade made up of, I think, something like 21 steps that immediately starts blood clotting in the perfect place where it needs to clot. But if that goes haywire, you know you got real problems, don't you? If a blood clot goes to the wrong place, but your body is so good at what it does, it hardly ever, very rarely sends a blood clot to the wrong place. Smash the finger of a 10-pound metal alloy arm that costs $4 million and wait 6 weeks and see what happens. What do you got? Smash finger. Cut the wires on one of those motors of that 10-pound, $4 million metal alloy arm and wait 2 days, 4 days, 6 days, see what happens. What happens? Nothing. Until some intelligent person comes back and fixes it, right? Thomas B. Warren puts that human hand up there and he said, Dr. Flew, did this hand have a designer? What does he have to say if he's an atheist? He just said the prosthetic limb didn't, and that was in 76 when we didn't have... Yeah, the prosthetic limb did. This human hand. Oh, Dr. Kukin said that prosthetic limb, that $4 million, 10 pounds, metal alloy. He said it's clumsy compared to what? Clumsy compared to what? Your human hand. Dr. Flew, did this hand have a designer? Dr. Flew said, no. Dr. Warren said, how did it get there? Dr. Flew said, it just grew there. Not very scientific of an answer, is it? Because when you see design, you know it had a designer. That was in 1976. Now here's the deal. As Paul Harvey used to say, the rest of the story. When Dr. Flew was 82 years old, he wrote a book titled There Is No God. He'd been the world's leading atheist for 50 years. Really? The no was marked out. The title of the book is There Is a God, subtitle, How the World's Most Notorious Atheist Became a Believer. And here's what he said, I have looked at this world so closely and I've always tried to do this. Follow the evidence where it led me. And I used to think the evidence led to atheism. I now know that is a logical impossibility. It cannot be the case. He said there is design in the universe, especially living organisms, especially the human body, that cannot be accounted for based on mindless, random chance processes. There has to be an eternal, supernatural, intelligent creator. The world's leading atheist says, you know what? I finally started being honest with the evidence and I realized I was wrong. That's exciting, isn't it? He made a big, big step in the right direction. But not big enough. They asked him, okay, so you believe that there's a God? He said, yes, I do. They said, which one? They said, you now think that there is a supernatural, intelligent creator out there, all-powerful? Here's what he said. He said, well, I believe the God of the Bible and Christianity would probably have more evidence and would be the most plausible, philosophically sound system out there. I think it probably would. He said, but I'm an old man. Nah, I'm probably not even going to investigate it. I'm just going to leave that to somebody else. And he died admitting there's a God and admitting Christianity is probably the place where you'd find out about that God, but he's just going to leave that to somebody else. You believe in God? Even the demons believe. And they tremble. You see, if the most important question in the world is whether there is a God or not, and all of the evidence points to the conclusion that there is, the next question has got to be on your mind, what's that mean for me? Now let me contrast Antony Flew with a man that I know by the name of Michael Houts. Michael Houts is a writer for us. He is a project manager for NASA. He is a strong believer in the God of the Bible and very faithful New Testament Christian. He didn't grow up that way. In fact, he grew up with the same mode of operation as Antony Flew, following the evidence where it led him. And he realized he grew up in an atheistic family, in an atheistic environment. But one day he started looking at the evidence and he started saying, well, this doesn't make sense. What they're telling me that proves evolution doesn't do that. And so he started looking at that and realized evolution wasn't true. And then he started looking at that atheistic idea and the Big Bang idea and realized it wasn't true. And he studied himself out of that. And then he studied himself into understanding that the Bible is God's Word. And as he started reading that Bible, he realized that that Bible was a representation of the mind of God, the Creator, to humans, and that God was asking people to do something. To love Him as a Creator and be willing to obey Him. And be willing to give up everything else they've got in the world to be connected to their Creator. And he studied himself in the New Testament Christianity. And he became an obedient follower of Jesus Christ by being buried with Jesus Christ in the watery grave of baptism, repenting of his sins. Because he wasn't going to stop at the, I think there's a God, but I'm not going any further. Once you come to the stark realization that God exists, the question is now to you, what will you do about it? Do you need to respond to your Creator? If you have any need to respond to the God who created this universe and created you, will you come tonight as we stand and as we sing?
When we walk with the Lord in the light of His word, the glory is yet on our way. While we do His good will, He abides with us still, and with all who will trust and obey. Trust and obey, for there's no other way to be happy in Jesus, but to trust and obey. Not a shadow can rise, not a cloud in the skies, but a smile quickly drives it